Joe. Hey, congratulations on your documentary, Race to Save the World.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hey, not a problem, not a problem. I want to remark first that I spoke to you, I want to say a year ago for another documentary, Ending Disease.
Oh, really?
So, and that too was a fascinating documentary that you actually made. So
I worked on these overlapping. I worked on Race to Save the World for 6 years, and I worked on Ending Disease for 4, and they happened to come out near each other. So it was quite a bit to juggle both of those at the same time.
I was going to say for many documentarians, they only handle one project at a time, and it takes, years to actually do it. So you were doing both of them at the same time.
Yeah, and the only justification for that, because it did create tremendous chaos, is that when in both these films, I raised the funds from tax-deductible donations. So in one film, I might not have money to keep shooting, but maybe in the other film, I'd raised a little so I could keep shooting. So it did work out in some ways to be doing both at once.
Well, I'm talking to both films with you, so this is terrific. So, what sparked you to do a Race to Save the World?
So, having seen 2 of my films now, I call my style of filmmaking life in progress. So, just like in a fiction film where someone writes it, so you're there at each moment, significant moment in the story. So everything that happens, you, the viewer, see it happening in real time. In many documentaries, that's not the case. They use, historical footage or something that's been shot long ago, and they just try to tell the story with a narrator. And so I try to be there at the significant moments as they unfold. That's hard to do. It's stressful. And, in something like the Race to Save the World, they were doing civil disobedience, and sometimes they didn't want word to get out ahead of time, and they were in another city. So I had to find out about it and get there in time. But the reason I felt that this style of documentary for a climate change film would work in a positive way is because climate change is overwhelming to wrap your mind around. And each year it gets more and more depressing what you hear. So then you see this documentary, and many of the documentaries tell you how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. And then, that information is important, but when you watch it, it just can be just so overwhelming that it makes the viewer paralyzed. What's different about this film is I'm following people who are not able to tune this out like most people. Even if people, realize how important climate change is and how important it is to do everything we can about it, they say things like, well, what can one person do? Or, I want to help, but I have to keep my job going, my family going. I don't have the time, the bandwidth. These are people who can't tune it out, who are in the trenches doing anything and everything they can, including civil disobedience, risking arrest, going to court, risking prison time. And I think that following these people, you see that taking action is the antidote for depression. Is the antidote for despair. If you're doing something, and certainly you don't have to be doing something like civil disobedience where you're risking arrest. There's many things that can be done, but when you're doing something, it does lift the despair, I think. And many people are suffering from that sense of foreboding about the future.
Now, there are protest techniques. I guess the question is the effectiveness of it, because it seems like it's an uphill battle, and they're not getting the solid results that everyone hopes for.
Well, there's a place for all kinds of different protesting. I just think that until tremendous number of people get in the streets, the politicians are going to keep their greenwashing, their double talk. They're pretending to do something when they do little or nothing. The corporations own the politicians. The politicians, elect the judges. And so things are happening at this very slow pace, which is dooming us to a future that is catastrophic. And so there are so many things in this world right now that, are demanding our attention: a pandemic, a war, in Ukraine. So it's hard to say, everyone has to focus on climate change and get involved in this fight for a livable future. But everyone does have to get involved in fighting climate change and do everything they can to create a livable future.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's so much noise out there. You have to be on the soapbox somehow.
I mean, a good example of that is this. They were talking about the Build Back Better bill, and that had this this amount of money in there to help fight climate change, to turn into electric vehicles and do other things for the grid, and it was not the amount of money that we need, but it was a great start. And there were also things to help poor families with kids, and there was healthcare money went to healthcare and childcare. All these things are important. All these things are critical. And if you're a family struggling to get by, as I think the majority of this country is, those are critical to your future. But climate change needs to be addressed now, and with a total commitment by everybody, by every person, by every government. And it can be, very frustrating when you look at the pace of change and you look at what needs to change.
Yeah. So how did you find your subjects? Because you're not following one or two subjects. You are following many subjects throughout your film here.
Yeah, there's about 6 groups of subjects that are in the film, and I probably followed 3 times that many to find the right people and the people that would trust my process. So there's something with civil disobedience that if one person engages in civil disobedience, such as chaining themselves to a fence or something, it's a misdemeanor. If 2 people conspire to do an act of civil disobedience, it can be charged as a felony. So many people show up at a protest, many people plan to do civil disobedience, but it's very hard to prove that it was a conspiracy to do civil disobedience. In the case of me filming, if I filmed them planning and following their lives, then it could be proved that this was a conspiracy. So on the one hand, I'd be very careful not to film any of the planning so that couldn't be subpoenaed. But on the other hand, I would show up to meet people for this film. I'm older. I'm from Los Angeles, which is suspect as a filmmaker. And I arrive with a very professional crew. I mean, we don't have a big crew, but we're very professional. We have great equipment and we know what we're doing. And to some people, it seemed like, whoa, who is this guy? Can we trust him? And that's a valid thought. So it was it was a long process to find the right people who were open to me filming them. As you know from watching the film, I didn't only want to film their politics and their protests. I wanted to film them with their families and their loved ones and their relationships. And I wanted to be, showing the whole person, the everyday moments as well as the big big moments in their lives. And so it took a while to find just the right people. It was a long process. And I would say the first 2 years of the 6 years, I hadn't found the right people that ended up being in the film in the end. You have to be very persistent.
So the people you got for the film here, they had the commonality of that they were willing to talk because of their passion.
Well, yes, they were willing to let me into their lives. Not just, there were some people that were like, yeah, sure, you can film me protesting, but once I go home with my loved ones, I'm not really open to that. Or I would film them and it didn't seem real. I really want to be able to show the whole person. I mean, I think that activists are demonized. This film was on Film Week. Film Week is this big thing. They show like 5 of the biggest blockbuster films they talk about. It's a radio show on National Public Radio every Friday. And they pick one documentary and they pick this film. And they made fun of the activists. By the way, they also picked Indian disease, and they were very complimentary about Indian disease. But in this film, it was one of our few negative reviews. They made fun of the activists like they wanted attention. So people demonize activists who are, putting their lives at risk and their livelihoods at risk to, fight for a livable future. And they make it seem like they're these, crazy people who are wanting attention or something. And so I wanted to show the whole person, how they interacted with their kids, their loved ones, their husband, their wife, and show them in a way that people could relate to them and connect with them. And I think the subjects in my film come across as very authentic.
Yeah, we could totally tell, especially those family scenes where sometimes they get into their family arguments over the protests. Excellent job with that.
Yeah, well, many activists, put the tremendous amount of time they have to put into this movement ahead of family time. And as you can imagine, that doesn't go over so well. And so I just wanted to show what it takes and the effect it has on their families and their loved ones. And as they're going through trials, they had to go through trials and what that was like. So I think that we've done a lot of promoting of this film with different climate groups, 350.org, Extinction Rebellion, Reality Project, and others. And I think that it really is energizing people to say, I don't have to do this, take this level of risk, but, it is exciting and fulfilling to get involved. To stand on the sidelines is frustrating, overwhelming, and depressing. To get involved is exciting and fulfilling and energizing. And we need everybody to get involved, or the politicians are just going to slow this to a halt, and the future is bleak. Yeah,
that is a systemic problem, most definitely. So, Joe, during some of these protest scenes or court scenes, how did you film them? You film them like you're a journalist yourself, off the sidelines, so this way it'll be, safe and accessible for you?
Well, so the courtroom is really a crapshoot in terms of the access you get. So we filmed Abby, who put herself on a 20-foot tripod to block an oil train. And then she and 4 others went to a trial. And that judge let us set up 2 cameramen in the courtroom. And I gave each cameraman 2 cameras. So we had 4 cameras in there. And as you can see, that was filmed really well. And he let us put microphones around the courtroom. We had a day to set up beforehand. It was great. On the other hand, we went to North Dakota and they treated us like pariahs. And They would not let us mic anybody. They would not let us have a microphone there. We could put one boom from the front row of the audience, and we had to have our camera guys way off to the side, and it was very hard. So when you're filming a courtroom scene, they often will change the schedule like 2 days beforehand. So you're all set to go there, and then they change that. So thank God that Southwest lets you change your reservation. Now, the protests themselves, we had to be careful that none of our personnel got arrested. And I did assure everybody who was working with me that I would not put them at risk on the one hand, and if something did happen, I would do everything I could to assist them. We were there with 2 cameras and a sound person. That's how our crew is, and I'm there with something in front of me that I can see what both cameras are shooting, and I can talk to the camera people in their ears. So we're a small group, but we try to be right in the midst of everything, and so that can be a little iffy.
So for you, Joe, personally, since this is the second time I spoke to you, how do you choose your subject? This one being environmentalism, last one, ending disease, about healthcare. I mean, what's going to be next then?
Well, I'm not sure what's going to be next at the moment, but I like to find something that is a pivotal issue that is either not being discussed or not being discussed in a way that people are sort of listening to each other or making any progress. I've done 3 films in a row. It started with American Winter, which was on families falling from middle class into poverty during the 2008 downturn.
Yeah.
And, it was looking at how people look, how politicians really were looking at helping ordinary people who are suffering, in this negative way, when they bailed out the banks and the corporations. And then when people were suffering, it seemed like this, oh no, that would bust the budget. You can't do that. And, helping people, even with, food and housing assistance, was a controversial issue. I mean, that was a very controversial issue. So then you go to healthcare and ending disease. So as you know from that film, medicine is fundamentally changing. It is completely changing from treating diseases over a lifetime to these one-time cures using stem cell and regenerative medicine. I was able to follow 10 clinical trials. Most of these clinical trials are not available to the general public yet, but I can see that these are working already as cures to some cancers and eye disease and people who have a broken neck and are quadriplegics are getting the use of their arms and hands. And over the next decade or 2, it's going to fundamentally change medicine. And but yet it's controversial. It is extremely controversial. In fact, during the Bush administration, they basically shut it down. And for 7 years, almost nothing was happening until California passed the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine bill that gave $3 billion to pursue regenerative medicine. And then with climate change, I mean, this is, as they say, an existential threat. It's already affecting us. Every week you hear of something, but there's articles that have come out just in this past week or 2 saying the ocean has passed the point of no return. That was in The Guardian. Then there was an article saying the Amazon rainforest is at a tipping point where it's becoming less resilient and might turn into a savanna rather than a rainforest. And then today in the New York Times, they're talking about how climate change is affecting mental health. And there was a survey of people aged 16 to 25 in 10 countries published in Lancet that found that 3/4 were frightened of the future, and more than half said humanity was doomed. And 40% of young people say they're hesitant about having children. I mean, this is something that is so critically important that it's addressed now with like just a kind of World War II approach of, you know, changing our industries to focus on renewable energy in a way that we did, you know, to build bombers or whatever during World War II. And, you know, that's not happening, and it's not even nearly happening. We can barely get anything done by our Congress. And so, you know, I felt that this film would energize people to participate rather than paralyze them by how depressing this situation is. That was my hope anyway.
Well, absolutely. So let me leave with one more thought is, as people will have the chance to watch Race to Save the World, what is the most important take that you would hope that they would walk away with after viewing your film?
Well, that taking action is the antidote for despair. That they said, you know, 3/4 of young people, you know, feel, you know, great despair about the future. And I think, you know, most people say, well, what can I do? You know, I'm just one person. But just getting involved and taking action and being, you know, in the midst of this and knowing that you're doing what you can and you're helping, makes people feel energized and feel good. And, you know, there's a certain camaraderie among people when you're in the midst of this that is really, you know, energizing and inspiring. So what I'd like people to take away is, like, everybody can do something, and everyone needs to do something, and everyone needs to get involved now, and everyone needs to get into the streets when the time is right and make their voice heard for a livable future.
Well said. And hopefully people will be energized after watching your film.
Well, thank
Joe,
you for taking the time. I appreciate it, Gig.
no, thank you for speaking to us again. And hopefully we'll do this third time.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Take care.